Hello, and welcome to the Science of Influence. I am Scientist Mel, and so today we're going to talk about the viewer-voted content, or viewer-voted topic called influence. So we've got gaslighting, confirmation bias, manipulation. We have these words here. We see them as buzzwords a lot floating around, especially with the current administration. And all of these different things can be a bit scary for individuals. So we're going to talk about how in the world can somebody influence other people and manipulate them to do what they want. See, and here my personal, my self-portrait is fantastic. I'm such a great artist. So we're going to talk about the science of influence. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is something called the Milgram experiment. The Milgram experiment is an experiment done by Milgram. He is the individual who wanted to investigate the influence that was going on, especially during the Nazi trials. So Nazis were actually being put to trial for crimes against, war crimes, and they were being asked, why in the world are you doing this if you knew that this was hurting people? And they said, I was just following orders. I was just following orders. That's what I was doing. You don't understand. I was just following orders. And so Milgram wanted to see, okay, let's see if we can get some science behind this and see what's going on. And so what they had is they had teachers that were the shockers. They had learners that were the shockees. And they had authority figures, these dictator types that were in lab coats, these particular scientists that were in the room. So how they did the experiment, they had people that were applicants and that, participants. They drew straws along with learners to determine who would be the teacher that's asking questions and who would be the learner that has to answer the questions. So what the participants didn't know is that these straws were rigged to where they would always be the teacher, and they had learners that were always going to be actors who were in on it and knew what was going on. So what happened is these teachers up here were going to give questions to the learners, and if the learners got it wrong, they got an electrical shock. So what happens is every time they got a question wrong, the electricity went up a notch. Now these teachers actually saw the learners being strapped into a chair with the electrodes added, so there was a whole aspect of realism here. And then there was an authority figure that was sitting in the room, and he wore a lab coat. He was the scientist figure that would sit there, and anytime a teacher would have a, had any kind of reservations, like they sound like they're really in pain, and the learners would be like, or actors like, gosh, I want to stop. I don't want to be in this experiment anymore. This is hurtful. This hurts me. And at one point, the learners would go completely quiet. They go absolutely quiet. And then once they got to like the lethal dose. So the teachers, what's kind of shocking about this, what was the outcome, is that 65% of the teachers went to the lethal dose of electric shock to the learners, regardless of their convictions. So even the teachers that were sitting there saying, they're like, hold on, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This sounds like this person is really being hurt. The authoritarian type of figure, the authoritative figure would sit there and say, you need to continue the experiment. You need to continue the experiment. The experiment must continue. And so that's all the scientist in the lab coat would say anytime the teachers had any kind of objection to continuing on. So 65% of them still went to the lethal dose. They repeated this experiment in the early 2000s, and they saw actually the same results. About 65% of people continued on all the way through the lethal dose. So this conclusion is, people will harm others if an authority figure holds some kind of responsibility. So when you're talking about the Nazis, and the Nazis were sitting there and they're like, I was just following orders, they were able to place some kind of blame on an authority figure. So next up, the Stanford Prison Exhibit. You have prisoners, guards, and their societal roles. So the Milgram experiment happened in the 60s. That was still kind of fresh from World War II. The Stanford Prison Experiment happened in the 70s, right after a massive prison riot happened, and scientists at Stanford University wanted to actually investigate just to see the types of roles that prisoners and guards would get involved in a situation. So what they did is they had applicants, and these applicants would show up, and they would they actually had some that were prisoners, and they had some that were guards, and the prisoners were actually arrested at their house. They converted part of one of the floors of Stanford in a lab, converted some of the labs to cells, and they started the experiment. The prisoners were dehumanized. They were stripped down, they were sprayed with the lice spray, and so the guards were in charge of instituting the control and the power over the prisoners. So what happened? The prisoners, rumors of revolt and escape started almost right away. They were punished and some were rewarded. And in the end, they suffered some emotional damage. The guards, they harassed the prisoners, and they did the punishing and the rewarding of various prisoners. The thing that's kind of frightening is they fell into those roles pretty easily. So these particular prisoners, I mean the guards, they fell into that role of cruelty and power kind of quickly. So, a bit more information. And they actually made a film about the Stanford Prison Experiment. You can actually check it out. So the first revolt happened within 24 hours of them being in prison. So by the next morning, there was a rumor of the revolt, and it happened. And so there were rumors of escape, plans of escape within 4 days, psychological break of prisoners within 3 days, so where they had to release some of them. And the experiment was over by the 5th day. They had to actually release people from this prison setup because it was causing them emotional damage. And so the American Psychological Association, between the Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison Experiment, actually started to look at the ethics of psychological testing on people because they don't want to cause harm. So what are the conclusions in regards to the Stanford Prison Experiment? Guards fell into authoritarian type of roles very quickly and implemented some forms of cruelty within days. So some of the punishments were involving prisoners doing push-ups, and then they would put their foot on the back of prisoners. They would also have other prisoners sit on the back of the prisoners doing push-ups. And in addition to that, those who weren't involved in revolting were given preferential treatment. They stripped down the other prisoners naked, took their beds, kept food and water from them for periods of time, would deny them use of the toilet facilities, and the ones who fell into line got their beds, got special food, and also got special clothing. And so it's kind of scary to see the kind of abuse of power that people can have very quickly. So the guards initially thought that this was a pretty boring job, and then they fell into the power roles pretty harshly. So that's an example of influence involving roles with power. So we've talked about the Milgram experiment. I see some of you have just joined. We talked about the Milgram experiment. I'll go back over that in a minute. And then we've talked about the Stanford Prison Experiment and how that involves various types of influence and power. Now let's talk about something called confirmation bias. This is a thing, and you can look this up. There's lots of studies that have been done in regards to this, and that's accepting evidence only if it reinforces your belief system. This is rationalizing and not reasoning. So people, especially with the current administration, people will accept evidence if it reinforces their own personal stance on things. So an example of this, in 1979, there was an experiment done on the death penalty. And the scientists wanted to see if they gave evidence to somebody, if they would change their stance on how they felt about the death penalty. And so what they did is they generated some fake studies, and they were both considered equally strong in regards to evidence and heavily peer-reviewed. They gave these particular studies to participants, and the participants were told to pick the study that they felt had the strongest case and the most evidence to back its claim. So here's something that's interesting. Participants who chose the study that was, they chose the study that was best reinforced their stance on the death penalty. So if they were anti-death penalty, they chose that stance. If they were pro-death penalty, they chose that particular study that reinforced their personal belief system and their stance. So, what's the conclusion for this? People will accept or reject evidence based on their personal stance and belief systems. So, there's a little bit of science and a little bit of evolutionary basis for this. So this is why it makes it very hard for people to accept new information. They have an automatic subconscious negative response to it. This is why science is important. Peer review is a rigorous process, but it requires lots of people to look at your stuff and let you know if it's crap, so you have a negative response automatically built in and wired to new information. So you have to overcome that confirmation bias, and it's there. So that's why peer review is essential, especially in the sciences, because other people can look at that and be more objective and say, okay, yeah, you need to go back and work on this. Or, hey, this is great, good job. And you're like, woohoo! So that's confirmation bias. Now, there's some evolutionary basis behind why we have confirmation bias, and it has to do with the fact that we are a bit more pack type of animal. We like to fit within a community. So if we're taught certain things and we have these particular types of communal-based things, especially when you're dealing with certain types of religions or certain type of cultural normatives, so you have different types of traditions that you feel like you're part of this group. So if you have anything that counters something that is against your group per se, you have this automatic negative knee-jerk reaction because it goes against your personal beliefs. You don't want to be isolated. So on a instinctual survival basis, you want to be in the group because in the group means you're safer. So there's a little bit of thought about confirmation bias in regards to, can you overcome that? Well, it's a bit of a survival instinct to want to stay with your group because there's safety with the group now, isn't there? So a lot of different scientists are kind of tossing around that idea and say, well, there's an evolutionary basis for that. You look at the individual who goes around and tells people, oh, you're wrong about this. Oh, that's kind of wrong. No, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5, it equals 4, So you have somebody who goes to a group and tells them they're wrong about something. What happens to them? They're isolated. And in the natural world, that means death. So you look at the social isolation. So it's kind of hard to separate that. And that's why things like peer review are so important. And you need to be able to look at new information and understand, okay, this is new information. This doesn't mean, I'm stupid or something, This is new information and it does go against my personal beliefs, but let me set that aside. So it actually takes a conscious effort to do that. And so that's why it's quite difficult for some people to move past that. So let's talk about tactics of manipulators. How are they able to get as far as they have? How are they able to do these things to people? We look at 45 right now. Great manipulator, isn't he? I didn't say that. What they like to do, one of the things they like to do is home court advantage. Home court advantage allows them to have you come to their house or their office, and they sit there and they're like, okay, this is my house, my rules, and they're going to do what I say because I'm going to establish some kind of dominance. So that's home court advantage. And manipulators like to use that pretty well out the gate. They're going to let you speak first. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to ask you probing questions to look for weaknesses and see what it is that makes you tick and what they can use against you. So they're always going to let you speak first. Well, not always. I'll say they do that. Manipulation of facts. Alternative facts, also known as lying. Woo! So they're going to say things. This is the truth. You're like, no, it's not. Yeah, this is an alternative fact. Come on. So manipulation of facts. They'll take a particular fact and spin it in such a way to where it makes them, come out looking like a rose. And that leads me to gaslighting. That's a term that's been thrown around a lot lately, especially with, they say 45 is currently gaslighting the U.S. What does that mean? It's convincing you that you have issues and not them. So their behavior, they're saying, they're doing something, and you're saying, no, you can't do that. And they're going, well, you got the problem, not me. And this comes from a film called Gaslighting. And what happens in the film is a man, at the time they had like actual lights that were done with gas, gaslight. They had gaslighting in the house. So the man was going around and he was dimming them a little bit each day, turning the gas down a little bit to where they weren't so bright. And so the woman was walking around going, is it a bit dimmer in here? And he goes, no. Are you feeling okay? Something wrong with you? So that's something that manipulators actually do. They gaslight you and try to convince you that something's wrong with you. They're not doing anything. It's a way that they shift blame. Another thing that manipulators like to do, they like to overwhelm you with facts, statistics, procedures, and red tape, especially down here. 45 likes to put people in court forever and ever and ever and ever and ever to keep from having to pay for his bills. So that's laws, procedures, red tape. You have to fill out all this paperwork. You have to fill out all this stuff. Get over all of this red tape, and they just hope you give up. That's what that is. They overwhelm you with that paperwork. Facts and statistics. Sometimes they like to throw their facts and statistics around to show you that they're intellectually superior. There may be absolutely no basis whatsoever for their facts and statistics, but they'll just start barking them out at you and not really give you a chance to go back and kind of look up and see how accurate it is until much later, but they overwhelm you with that to try to assert some kind of intellectual superiority to where, again, you just give up. Another thing manipulators like to do, they like to raise their voice, display negative emotions and negative surprises. This is where we get to the drama. Okay, that's where a lot of people throw that word around a lot. Negative surprises, especially with the drama. All of a sudden, everything's wrong and stuff is happening to this person. And they're angry about it. And they're displaying negative emotions and they're raising their voice like, this is just horrible. Look what this person did on this website about me that one time. And then it becomes a big freaking deal. They overinflate a lot of things. So that's something that manipulators do, is they raise their voice, display negative emotions, negative surprises, random bouts of, the end of the world is coming. And this person's doing this thing. So that's something that manipulators do. So if they have a negative surprise on you and they expect you to make some kind of decision about it, and they don't give you any time to do it, you don't have any ample time to actually think about what's going on, and they need a decision right now. I need this decision right now. I'm sorry, you can't have a week, you can't have 2 days, I need it like in 5 minutes. And so sometimes manipulators do that in order to get you to make the decision that they want you to make. Another thing they do, negative humor, to poke at your weaknesses and disempower you. So they'll make jokes. So if you have like a particular weakness involving yourself, conscious about your height, so they might make a joke about somebody with a certain height, and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot, you have a thing about that, you know. Then they're trying to disempower you, and they're going to judge you and criticize you and make you feel inadequate. That's what they do. So they break you down. They break you down to where you're just a shell of a person, and then you'll do what they say just so you can get the positive comments from them. And another thing, we're almost done with these. They do lots of stuff. They give you the silent treatment and they pretend to not know what you're talking about. So if you say, you broke my coffee cup. So if you have a manipulator at your work, they might break your coffee mug, you know, just casually, and then look at you. And I'm like, you broke my coffee mug on purpose. Why would I do that? And then they give you the silent treatment. They don't want to answer questions that holds them responsible or accountable for anything. So they just won't talk to you. And then you're like, why wouldn't you talk to me? And so when they are positive, you have that thing called positive reinforcement, to where you try to do what they want in order to get that other positive experience again. And then we got guilt baiting, unreasonable blaming, and victimhood. So they want you to feel guilty for them. So they might say, well, this person did this to me. Again, drama, you know. this person did this to me, and I can't believe it, I'm having to do this. And then they play the victim along with that. And they're like, look at them, they just did this awful stuff to me. Especially narcissists, they love this sort of thing because it gives them attention, and they feed on that. So they play the victim. Unreasonable blaming of other individuals, and that's what they kind of do. So these are other ways that they can actually use in any type of combination of those tactics to get what they want from you. So either you give up and you say yes to make them shut up, or you know, positive reinforcement from time to time, they can get what they want from you based on their treatment of you, because you want that particular treatment to stop. So that's essentially what they do. So in the current situation, in the era of where we've got alternative facts, we've got people that automatically, you know, knee-jerk reaction to new information, and they don't want to try to shift their personal beliefs or perspectives to, and you know, or they're offended by the fact that you would give them new information. And then we have manipulation tactics, and how people just kind of fall in line to particular power roles, especially if they're allowed particular amounts of power. And then the Milgram experiment, you know, that was the Stanford experiment, and then the Milgram experiment where the teachers and the learners, the teachers were administering hazardous levels of electrical shock to learners. Now, the learners weren't actually getting those shocks. They were actors. But the fact remains that the teachers thought that they were actually delivering those shocks. And while there's an authoritative figure within the particular room saying, you have to continue this experiment, and then the teachers are going, hey, wait, you know, this person sounds like they really don't want to do this anymore, and this is hurting them. Then the authority figure goes, you need to continue this experiment, or the experiment must continue. And 65% of people went all the way to the lethal dose of the electrocution. So that's a bit of the influence there. People will do things to others if they can place that responsibility on an authority type of figure. So that's all I've got in regards to the science of influence, manipulation, gaslighting, all of these things. How can we get people to do what we want them to do? And how do you get individuals like 45 in office? That's very oppressive and apparently has lied a lot. Now under investigation by the FBI for treasonous behaviors, or at least seemingly treasonous behaviors. So what are we going to do in this context? We're going to stay informed. We're going to stay loud, and we're going to stay strong. That's the only way you can overcome influence and manipulation, is to, you know, question everything. Question everything. And if you think something's happening to you and you're being manipulated, get another person outside the situation to have a look and see what they think too. That's another way to kind of validate your concerns. So that's all that I've got on the science of influence. So please feel free to hop over to Twitter. I'm Scientist Mel. Oh, here it is. I'm Scientist Mel on Twitter. I'm Scientist Mel here on Facebook. And I do have a YouTube channel where I keep these as well. So these particular episodes as well. And I guess I will see you around. I hope you guys have a fantastic Saturday and enjoy the rest of your day. And I will be posting a poll on Twitter soon about the next particular topic that we'll have for next Saturday. So this particular topic was the science of influence, which was dead tied with the science of dogs, which was last weekend, and then the previous weekend was the science of the scientific method. So I'll post another poll on Twitter, and I'll put a link to it on my Facebook page as well, to where you can go and you can vote for a particular topic that you want us to discuss. You can always interact with me here on Facebook as well as Twitter. So you guys have a great Saturday, and I will see you later. Bye.